may be seated.
Well, good morning, church. It's good to be with you this morning. A couple of months ago, Kevin reached out to me and said, hey, would you mind speaking on March 20th? And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, would you give a presentation on Midwestern Children's Home? And I got to thinking that as far as the kind of presentation on Midwestern Children's Home, I don't know that this has been given in this form in many, many years. And so this morning, we really are going to be focusing on the ministry that is Midwestern. Maybe I hope that you will learn things that you didn't know before. My thought is that there are those in the audience that maybe you've heard that this church supports Midwestern Children's Home, but maybe you don't know a whole lot about it. And so I just want to take some time this morning to give you the heart of our ministry and a little bit of the nuts and bolts. And then I pray that you will be blessed this morning as we dig a little deeper into what all that God is doing out at Midwestern Children's Home. And so to start, I used to show pictures. I have a little video. It's about 2 minutes long. This was taken last spring, so it's not quite that green, or the lake's a little muddy probably. But this is what it looks like from an aerial view of Midwestern Children's Home out in Pleasant Plain, Ohio.
The Midwestern Children's Home Ministry is a loving tribute to the compassion of our Lord, who said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19:14.
So when you come up and you talk about someplace like Midwestern Children's Home, I could probably spend the next 30 minutes just talking to you about all the buildings that, for whatever reason, we own on campus. And if you got to see the view of that, this weird thing got put out in the middle of some cornfields in a little place called Pleasant Plain, Ohio. And it looks like a weird little neighborhood. And there are many of our neighbors who still, I think, wonder what in the world do we do there, and not understanding of everything. As you just see, why would you put a neighborhood in the middle of all of that? And so if you have questions about how we maintain all of that, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But really where I want to go with you this morning isn't about buildings or our campus or 167 acres and what do we do with that or would not do with that. And the campground versus the campus, as that's where Camp Kumo is in the summertime. But really, I want to share with you the heart of the ministry that God is given since 1967 on that land, on that campus, in those houses. And if you've ever been anywhere where maybe someone came and talked to you about a children's home type of ministry, be that in America or be that overseas, well, we can go to James 1:27. And unfortunately, I feel like the sisterhood of children's homes, we've come out too often and said, you know what, you really need to give us your money because James, the brother of Jesus, said so. And James 1:27, where it says, take care of the widows and the orphans. And probably several years ago, a gentleman named Dr. Shank, he was president of Ohio Valley University for a while. He's a national spokesman to children's homes across the nation, but he's an Old Testament scholar. And as we were talking about this, he didn't take us to James 1:27, he took us to Deuteronomy 10, where Moses is giving the speech to the Israelites of what's it going to look like when you take this land that I'm about to give you. And this is Moses' farewell speech, a very long speech if you read all of Deuteronomy. But in chapter 10, he says, when you take the land, always remember the widow, the orphan, and even goes on to say the stranger or alien, depending what version you read. And he says, because you were once aliens and strangers in a strange land, make sure you take care of those that would be in need as you get the blessing of the promised land. And so as I bring up to you James 1:27 this morning, I really bring up to you that idea of the heart of God and his incredible love for us is that his people ought to be taking care of those that for whatever reason find themselves in a place that maybe they can't care for themselves like they ought to. The giving for Ukraine that we're in the process is just that. Their world's been torn upside down. If you've seen any footage, people are losing their homes as bombs have hit them. And we as a church are called to take care of those that for that reason can't take care of themselves. But as I come back to America and not overseas, we continue to have issues in America with families, with children, that there's some struggles going on there. And so God created a place like Midwestern Children's Home that children could come and live for a time, that it would be a good place for them, a healthy place for them, regardless of whatever they've came from the past. And they could be loved and cared for at Midwestern. And so as I bring forth James 1:27, I'm not using that as a legalistic binding, but I'm like, can we come in touch with the heart of God and join in a ministry that is trying to honor what his heart says? What does love really look like? And is that idea of love gives, love serves, love cares for. That's what love does. It's an active kind of love, and that's what that is. And so that idea of true religion, caring for those that for whatever reason find themselves in a situation that they need extra care for a time, that's all we're trying to do at Midwestern Children's Home. And so some commonly asked questions as we go through this, well, what are the kids like that you serve? And a lot of our kids come to us with a background of abuse, neglect, dependency. They haven't got their needs met. They've grown up in families that for whatever reason, there's been struggles. And maybe that has something to do with parents using drugs and alcohol. Maybe that has to do with unhealthy living situations where there's abuse going on, maybe between the spouse, the husband, the wife, the paramour, and the kids are grown up in this. And so they come to us because they have some deep-seated hurt. They have some deep-seated need. I must be clear, we primarily serve teenagers. Most of our kids are 12 to 18 years old. And I know we sang the song, Jesus Loves the Little Children, and I never know what to make of that. You look at some of our kids and they don't look very little anymore. They look full grown. And I remember doing a question and answer session like in a Bible class time, and for whatever reason, the church that I was doing that in had all ages in there. And I remember this little, I will call her 7 or 8 years old, she raises her hand at the end of that, she goes, why don't you care for little kids? And she kind of stumped me. I mean, it was coming from a 7-year-old, and I don't know even what I said, but I went away and I prayed about, well, what is the answer to that? And all I could look back as I saw the whole entire history of Midwestern Children's Home going all the way back to 1967 when the first few kids showed up there that spring was, for some reason, God called us to serve teenagers. And when God calls you to do something, ought not you go down that path? And I would say, quite honestly, it might be easier for us if we cared for the little, the 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Don't you love being around teenagers? Don't you love being around teenagers, right? Okay? You're like, yes, that is my favorite group. I want to be with well, it's one of my favorite groups. But most people don't go, ooh, I love teenagers. That's the best stage of life. Most of your mamas are thinking, no, it's a lot younger than that, And they need love. They need a good, firm, solid place to be, to live. Because we know the teenage years are in so many ways the hardest years of growing up. The hardest years, the most tumultuous years with all the hormones going on because of puberty, because of the identity search of who am I versus who are you, and what gives you the right to parent me? We deal with that question at Midwestern Children's Home, as you can imagine. What gives you the right to parent me? And so we go on this journey, and we say most have significant attachment issues. And what does that really mean? That means they're really good at pushing people away. That they don't innately, they might make you think that they love you or that they're really into you, but anytime you start drawing close, their reaction is I can't handle that level of relationship. I can't handle the intimacy between like a parent and a child, and so I push away at that. Now, why would they do that? And I want to be respectful. I'm not trying to be too much of a downer, but let me just go down this road just a little bit, because it really is what happens in that earliest stage of life for many of our kids. That when they were very little and they cried out, maybe nobody came. And they cried out some more and nobody came. Or then they cried out some more, and when mom came, she was angry and hitting and abusive. And even though that child can't talk, even though that child's brain can't process language at all, what they can learn is don't trust adults. They aren't there for you, and they might hurt you. And so we come along with this 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid later on, and we're like, man, we're glad you're at Midwestern Children's Home, and we want to care for you. And they're like, I don't trust adults. They're not safe. Are you sure? And through the years, I've tried to tell almost every kid I could when I first meet them, I'm glad you're here. And they go, you're crazy, man. I don't want to be here. I would have never chosen to come to Midwestern Children's Home. But I've seen the look in their eyes too many times when I've said, I'm glad you're here, because I don't know that they've been told that very much in their life. They've been told things like, I wish you were never born. You're always going to be a failure. And to give them the love of, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that God has brought us that we can get to know and we can love you and we can serve you. Just to set a different course for them. That maybe that wall can come down a little bit and they can start going, not all adults are bad. Not all adults will hurt or abandon. Where do we get these children from? Well, we work with children's services and juvenile courts and mental health agencies. We also are the only agency, and this has even come to light this week in some of our work, we're the only agency that really will work with children in private families. And the first thing that I want to say about that list there is, in reality, it doesn't matter where we get the kid from, there's still that same hurting kid that I just described to you. There's still, whether Children's Services has got involved, whether they've done something through they don't trust adults and they're good maybe then at pushing adults away. And one of the ways you do that is you act out and you misbehave. And then maybe you do something enough that juvenile court gets involved in your life. Mental health agencies, children's hospitals, psych unit refers children to us. Many mental health counselors throughout Cincinnati know of Midwestern Children's Home and refer kids to us. And some of those are in private families because they're struggling. And what happens when counseling is not enough to bring those issues back together? And we know that teenagers are hurting in our society. Unfortunately, you don't have to watch the news very long to understand that teenagers are hurting in our society. We don't have to go to some foreign country to find hurting kids. And I would love it if counseling is enough and they can be in their families and they can do all of that. But what happens when they need a little bit more? And I've talked with many parents through the years, and they're like, I just don't know. We got to do something. We're not safe in our own home. I've talked to moms who say, I feel so unsafe in my home, I sleep with my bedroom door locked because I'm not for sure what my kid might do to me in the middle of the night. Because there's that much anger against the parents. And I've usually said, well, if your kid had cancer, what lengths would you go to help your kid overcome that cancer? And I said, well, behavioral, emotional issues are just as devastating as any kind of medical issue. So wouldn't you go through the process to get the help you need so that we can get to the other side of that and that child doesn't have to live with those issues anymore? And they can kind of slowly warm those mamas' hearts. They can warm that up to yes, placement is the best decision right now. And so in the big scheme of things, I said, that's all the same kid. They're just a hurting kid, and there's different layers of people involved in their lives, and it's getting significant enough that there would be some help when they come to Midwestern Children's Home. And so we're not out here, we can absolutely be. We were started as what you might call an American orphanage. That's why I start with James 1:27. And in the late 1960s, whole families were sending their teenage kids to us. And this family might have 4 kids and we got all of them. And this family might have 6 kids and we got all of them. And if you really want to know Dwayne Tennant, if you know Dwayne, he raised a lot of those kids way back in the day as a house parent for us. And he can still tell you the stories of those kids and the crazy families they came from. We've never lost that even though we've become a little more of a treatment-oriented place, we still so much just will help kids in the level they need us to help. And they might be with us for quite a while. They might be with us 6, 9, 12 months, just depending on what their situation is or their needs. So what is our philosophy of care? Well, first and foremost, we're private and faith-based. Yes, with Children's Services place a kid with us, they pay us money to take care of that kid, just like if they would place that kid in any other foster home or any other group home setting, they pay us for that. But we are our own entity. We sign contracts for that, and I have literally walked away from contracts when this county or that county might want to go, well, we don't like the spiritual component of your program, and we're not sure we want to place kids with you because of the spiritual component of your program. I'm like, that's fine. And maybe we don't bring those kids in. But people say, well, why would you work with Children's Services and take them? And I'm like, in the reality of this, and this is another definition of an orphan, if you're in the custody of Children's Services, the government has custody of you. Some caseworker is making all the decisions for your life, whether they're doing their job well or they're doing their job poorly. And that is the nature of your life as you have Children's Services having custody of you. And I look at all of those kids and I say, I think they need to know about Jesus as much as anybody else, because that stinks when you got to be in the custody of the government. And it's a healthy thing, and it's a good thing, and it's the way our child welfare system is set up, that the government is the ultimate protector of children. And therefore, that's why they end up into custody. But it's not the greatest situation. And there comes with hurts and hardships and despair with that happening in their lives. We do have an emphasis on collaboration. We work with psychiatrists because, you know what? Our society likes to throw medication at people. Do you know that about our society? You know? And there's antidepressants and there's antipsychotics and there's even some of our kids are on vitamin D because where they came from, they didn't get enough sunshine. And they actually prescribe them vitamin D. We're like, oh, if you've been to Midwestern, they'll be outside. They'll be playing basketball. You saw that in that video. They'll be outside. We don't need vitamin D. But it's amazing to me the amount of medication that a lot of our kids come to from other places because that was going to be the fix. Medication has its place, especially for any of you know that you struggle with depression or other mental health issues, medication absolutely has a place. But we want kids on the right amount of medication, not too much and not too little. So we collaborate with psychiatrists, we collaborate with therapists, we collaborate with probation officers because some of them are on probation and that's who we work with. We don't do it in a vacuum. We don't just bring the kids in and go, okay, we're going to be your all in all, and you're not going to have access to everybody else. We live a kind of a complicated life, and that means that if we can still connect with their biological family and help them have a healthy relationship with that, we're collaborating, we're helping that biological family get healthier, because ultimately we all have that yearning for mom that God built in us. And that gets us to our family teaching model. We hire house parents. I'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute, but we hire house parent families to come in and live in each unit. We've done that from the beginning. And what that meant was that Midwestern, when you go in there, it doesn't feel like an institution. It doesn't feel like some sort of military camp. It feels like you're moving in with a family. It feels like a home. And if you've been in our homes out there, you know that they feel like a home. They're decorated however the house parents want to decorate them. Some of our house parents love to paint a lot, and the colors change often. And other of our house parents are like, it's safe, it's tan, and I like it just like that. But it feels like a home. But some of you are that way too. Some of you paint your homes all the time, and some of you are like, it's tan, it's nice, and I leave it alone. And your home feels like a home, right? But as that family comes together, we don't have a cafeteria on campus. We all have dinner around the dinner table. And our house parents cook right there in the kitchen, and it's this family meal kind of thing. Oh, the American society needs to bring back family meals, right? We've gotten too splintered. We're going in too many different directions. We have this family teaching model. One of the things that I can't give you book, chapter, verse on. So I'm giving you what I believe is God's heart, but I can't give you where exactly in a given verse it says this. But God created us to live with our biological families. Maybe you can go to Genesis 1 and read that a little bit. But what happens when the biological family, for whatever reason, breaks down? What happens when we have kids that both parents are in prison and the parents can't care for them because they're in prison? We've worked with kids through the years. We continually work with kids that I guess they're orphaned by at least one parent because that parent is no longer alive on this earth and therefore can't care for them. We've worked with kids in all kinds of situations with different families. And when those things break down, what's the next best thing? And we feel like using God's model and a family teaching model keeps us as close to what the Word of God says children ought to be raised in than any other way we could do it. And so we value our house parent model to the nth degree so that the kids do live with a family. They are cared for in a family situation. And they learn the values of family. They look at our house parents and go, you people are crazy. You don't cuss at each other. They've never seen a mom and a dad not cuss at each other. You people are crazy. You don't yell at each other all the time. You actually get along and act like you love each other. I don't get this. And I can tell you a story that we actually have on video if you go to our YouTube page. But as a young lady years ago living with Faye Fuquay, Faye's scared to death of cats. If you don't know that Faye's scared to death of cats, she's scared to death of cats, especially kittens. And this one young lady thought it would be really funny to take a kitten and basically kind of throw it at Faye. And Faye freaked out like Faye normally freaks out, all right? It's a fear of hers. And this young lady said, I was scared to death what was going to happen from there. I just tormented this lady who's offered up her home to me and is trying to care for me, and I'm scared to death what's going to happen. She said she came to my room, and she said, first of all, don't ever do that cat thing again. Rule number one. Second of all, we're glad you're here. We love you, and we want to be a different kind of place for you. She said, I was blown away. Nobody had ever loved me like that. That I could totally make you mad, I could totally offend you, and you would still come back with love and not anger and hate and not even retribution. You got me, I'm going to make your life miserable. And she learned a different kind of love that day. So most of our kids come to us with trauma. That's that abuse that we just talked about. Trauma is now the buzzword in the child welfare industry, but it's probably the buzzword in America for everything. Even in the Ohio education plan, schools have to be aware of trauma in children. And so, yes, we're aware of trauma in children. And we do really understand that trauma has an incredible way to even kind of change the way a brain works and functions and all of that. Now, I chose the song Mighty to Save. Mike asked me, I got to put some input in those songs. And when I look at trauma and the real effects that that has on the brain and people's life over years, God's mighty to save. And no matter what that early childhood experience is, God is mightier. He's bigger than what anything a trauma brain might be struggling with. And he can bring healing to that person, to that brain. It's a journey. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Have you heard that? They say that, there is a really weird scripture, and I've forgotten exactly where it is in the Old Testament, that talks about the sins of the father and 7 generations. And I grew up hearing the sins of the father's last 7 generations. And then I went and read that scripture, and that's not what it says. But it does say something about a generational effect of the sins of the father. And that's what we know. You know that alcoholism goes from generation to generation to generation. Child abuse goes from generation to generation to generation. But when I really went back and read that scripture, because I didn't want to be the person thinking, that means that if I was raised by an alcoholic, I'm destined to be an alcoholic and there's nothing I can do about that. And that's not what that scripture teaches. There's power to overcome. Jesus works in mighty ways that if I was raised by an alcoholic, I'm going to have to live my life with the reality of that understanding. But that doesn't mean I have to go down that same path and live in those same ways. God is mighty to save. God can move us to a different place. But it's a journey and it's hard. And there is an effect there that we see. But you can pick yourself up and you can move to a different way. And that is the hope. Love hopes all things. That's one of the things the bass line says in that song we love. The love, the greatest command to love one another. Love hopes all things. Someone says to us, what's your success ratio? And I want to tell you overall, about 80 to 85% of our kids come to us and they move on to someplace they would rather be beyond us. That could be a foster home. That could be an adoptive home. That could be going back with their family. Whatever that means, about 80 to 85% of our kids, if you just say success is defined of where do they leave and go to, we do pretty well with what God gives us. But I say that we also train our house parents of all the kids you're going to work with, how many are you going to feel like you really set them in a different way, a different course? And most people in our industry say 1 out of 10. 1 out of 20. Love hopes all things. How do we keep going? How do we keep doing what we do? Because we believe in a God that's bigger than anything we can know or see in this moment. And thankfully, they have a lot of years left. And I can tell you stories about kids that have gotten back in touch with us years later, and they're like, you people were different. You people loved. You people were even consistent with your consequences, and I thank you for that. Imagine a kid saying, thank you for being consistent with your consequences. It's not what most kids say. But I remember one lady called up, and she was there long before I ever worked for Midwestern Children's Home, and so I'm struggling to answer this lady. And this lady, when we figured out her, Beth LaCourse, if you know Beth, was her house parent. Beth still works for us. I got to go to Beth. I was like, do you remember this young lady? She goes, oh, man, she was trouble. She was mean. She was ornery. And she was one of that 15 to 20% we didn't do well with, and she went on out of here, and it felt like a failure. And when she called back 20 years later maybe, she said, you took me to church somewhere. You were the only people to take me to church somewhere. What was that church? I've got to get connected to God. What was that church? And Beth said, I would have never thought she would have been the one calling back, asking that question. So we don't know what we're doing. We don't know the impact we're having. We know that we have them for a season in the tumultuous teenage years, and what's going to happen from there, we don't know. So So we do this with our house parents, and I left this slide in. We have a house that's empty, ready for people that, well, it's not quite ready. We've thrown out the bathrooms. But if you said to me, I want to be a house parent, we'd find a way to get those bathrooms reinstalled quickly. So we're looking for a set of house parents. We have a brand new set of house parents coming on board on April 1st. I think you will get a chance to meet them. I think they're going to be around here. That's Joe and Misty Polly. They'll be here in just a couple weeks. But beyond that family, I have a whole nother house that could be served by house parents. And so we are looking for house parents. And it might be one of you people actually here, tell me more about this house parent thing. Let's talk. Let's talk about that. There's a house parent tour that I can take you on, and we'll talk through all the things about what it means to do laundry for six teenagers and all kinds of stuff like that. But we can talk through that. But you know what? There have been times that somebody in an audience where I was speaking, they knew of somebody that wasn't even in the room and went, you know what? These people might be really good at that. Let's connect you to. So if you have any thoughts about someone that could be a set of house parents for us, please get in touch with me about that. I'm going to speed up. I know I've gone over. Our annual budget really is about $1.8 million. The school's about a third of that, and it is totally self-funded. I won't get into the details of that. It's complicated, and it happens, and we don't have to worry about that. But we rely on about 40% of our income through charitable support. For all of you that blessed us at the gala this past year, thank you. That was our most successful financially gala ever, and we're appreciative of you coming alongside of us in that. It's the events like that, it's individual donations that help us with that. So the money comes from congregational donations. If you didn't know it, Withensville Church of Christ gives monthly to Midwestern Children's Home. Withensville is one of the most generous congregations that support us. We get support from like 100 congregations all over Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Indiana. And you guys are one of the leading churches in your support to us as we raise the money to support the items. We get special contributions in the fall. School supplies come. We're always taking in grocery and personal care items. Gift cards are nice. We just pass those along to the house parents, and then they just get extra money for groceries, which nowadays you need extra money for groceries, right? And we have clothing donations and different things like that. And then we have work projects I've really gone over. So if you have any interest in volunteering at Midwestern Children's Home, from plumbing to electrical to painting, those are skilled things, or to less skilled things like the grass and the trees and all of those kind of things, we'd love to have you come out and participate with us in that. And then we do get individual donations. There are people that give us $5 a month. I have a donor that regularly gives us $5 a month. I have another donor that gives us $500 a month. And the only reason why I bring them up to you is they're living on a military income. But something about what he does, he gets hazard pay. And for like 10 years, they've been sending us $500 a month, basically giving his hazard pay to us. So we're blessed by individual donors that help us meet those monthly expenses as we go on. We do have memorials. You can donate money to us and say, I want to do this in honor of so-and-so. Maybe that person is still alive and well. Maybe that person has passed, and it's a way to honor their memory. And then we have ongoing amounts that people give. Estate planning. All I want to say to this real quickly, and I know I've gone way over, but real quickly is I believe as a tradition, really value what we do with our monies, that we're conscientious about giving of our ongoing expenses so that we're honoring God in our money as well as our time and every other thing. But we don't necessarily correlate that to our estate planning. And I would, whether you're giving to Midwestern or you're giving to Withensville or you're giving to Kumo or whatever, or Fort Hill or whatever, have you given part of that estate to God as well? Have you given money, set aside monies in your estate for that? We can take stocks and bonds. All of those things just help us create the reserves to make sure we keep going on and on and on. So, real quickly, that's hard to read. It says a Christian home because someone cares, and the S in someone is capitalized. I I don't come tell you all these crazy stories to make you feel bad, but I really believe that we all have our hurts. CR talks about our hurts, our habits, our hang-ups. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. So when we tell kids on our sign out by the road, someone cares, they're not talking about Barry Boverie. They're not talking about any of our house parents. They're not talking about whoever might work for us. They're talking about God. He cares for them, and he is mighty to save. And we just want to be the hands and feet at Midwestern Children's Home in that way. This morning, God is offering that to you if you've been disconnected from him. He is mighty to save. Cast your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. Brothers and sisters, there's no sense of leaving here with, well, we can't just magically make stress go away. But there's no sense in leaving this place with the burdens that you walked in. And so this is a moment of invitation, not to come forward and have a moment of confession, but to feel God's loving arms as he cares for you. If we can help you in any way, pray for you, comfort you, love you, please.